I know that players are always looking to mine those marginal gains, and stimulants like, like caffeine, etc., are used by players, and things like Adderall as well. Prescription medication for ADHD. I think it affects about 4.5% of the population, and of course, Major League Baseball, I think about 1 out of 10 players, 10% are granted an exemption. And Dr. Doug Richards at University of Toronto, has written some on that. And so I was wondering, for yourself, in terms of, maybe we start with a player who needs to take this medication, justly needs to take it. Is there, what are the impacts on sleep, and how could you help to mitigate that?
Okay, so first of all, that comment you just made, that the old timers are probably wondering if they could have come in late. I don't think so, because most people were taking greenies. And I'll tell you, old timers will say that they miss the greenies more than they miss the steroids.
Interesting.
And so first of all, some background again for your audience. So Adderall is a long-acting amphetamine, and it's approved for ADHD. And so it was, of course, amphetamines were once super common in baseball. They're called greenies.
Yep.
Right, and I think the legend is that there were players who served in World War II who brought them back with them. And then, of course, they were passed casually for decades. You could find them in bowls like candy.
Yep.
But, right, and there may be some element of truth, because they were used by pilots in the war. So
absolutely, yeah.
So you never know. So well, they were banned in 2006, and now the only legitimate way a player can get them is if they carry a diagnosis of ADHD. And of course, there's that debate that you just mentioned, that whether the diagnosis is legit or not. And again, the topic, of course, needs a very nuanced approach, because, of course, there are athletes who truly have ADHD.
Absolutely.
Right, and on the other hand, of course, the thought is that players know it helps them with focus, with alertness. Some people will say it helps them to be in the moment, it helps them get into flow, so they know it's performance enhancing. So
it's a difficult terrain to navigate, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And that question you had about, maybe we should go backwards, because we should explore what it does to sleep. And I would say that there are 3 things that happen. First of all, they're allowed to take the long-acting dosage only, because for some reason the belief is that the league felt that long-acting amphetamines were not performance enhancing.
Okay.
Now, I'll tell you that all players, or I guess I should say most players, because I haven't met all players, but most players take it just before the game.
Yeah.
Because they know it helps them focus. And when during the day do they need the most focus, Mark? They need it.
Show up at the ballpark and get ready to play, right?
Exactly. Yeah. They need it when they're going to step out and play. And so, obviously, if it's long acting, it's still in their systems when they're trying to fall asleep. So it definitely contributes to insomnia, which is difficulty initiating or maintaining sleep at night. The second thing that is concerning is that it contributes to anxiety, and your heart rate goes up. The symptoms from the side effects are similar to what you would have if you were anxious, and your brain sometimes can't differentiate between the two. So there's some studies that it contributes to anger outbursts and anxiety, and mental health is an issue with all league players right now.
Yeah, population as well.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then finally, there is, and this is where sometimes players don't realize that there is a symptomatic overlap between ADHD symptoms and sleep restrictions. So if you're sleep deprived, you're going to find it difficult to pay attention, to focus, to concentrate. And that is also the key symptom of ADHD.
Yeah, it's a bit of a chicken or the egg, isn't it?
Right. So and so the presence of sleep restriction will itself aggravate ADHD symptoms. And if the ADHD symptoms get worse, then typically people up the dose of the stimulant, but then that stimulant will mess with the much needed sleep that night. And so it's like a vicious cycle.
Yeah, I can definitely, see players kind of circling the drain, just going in that sort of downward spiral between this lack of sleep and requirement for more medication.
Right.
It's a tricky one to navigate. And, I imagine today, obviously, if, when I grew up, we didn't have phones that weren't attached to the wall. But now we have a generation of people kids who are used to having a phone next to their bed every night.
Yes.
And so, something for us at Canada Basketball that we're cognizant of and always trying to, as you mentioned, sort of educate and, of course, nudge with certain behaviors. But I'd love to hear your take on, the impact on athletes, the impact in baseball, and what are some tips or strategies that you use in baseball to help offset that?
So, when the one thing I have to tell you is that we now have a generation of players who have never slept without a phone in their hands.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
Yes, because this is what they have always known, that they have to go to bed and there's a phone in their hand, and the fact that they are always, they're trying to, they're playing video games, they do everything, whatever they're doing to relax, it's done on an electronic device. Mm-hmm. Most times it's a handheld device, it's interactive, and the key thing to remember is that using those devices is a distraction, and it's not true relaxation. Mm-hmm. And that players have to build a winding down schedule. They have to, it's like if a car is going really fast, it's going to take, you have to keep the distance between the car in front more, because it's going to take you longer to brake. Similarly, the faster you've been going, the more you need to do to relax and unwind before you can actually fall asleep.
That's a great metaphor.
And typically, Mark, that winding down, which occurs in the last 45 minutes or an hour before their bedtime, should not include electronics. It should include relaxation. It could include reading a book. Mm-hmm. It could include listening to a podcast. I would say something dull and boring, not yours.
Nice. And Meeta, if you're looking to kind of make the best of the worst decisions, for someone who's, rather than watching someone on a show or Netflix on their device or tablet, is watching on a television set further away, going to be, a better, worse option, so to speak?
Yes, I mean, there is a lot of research, and again, it goes either ways. It talks about how blue light from the handheld devices will disrupt your sleep, and some, and there is a lot of variation. So something as less than as 30 lux is enough to suppress your melatonin, while some people need more. But to me, if it delays your bedtime by even 15 minutes, and in those 15 minutes you can get frustrated and get even more anxious about not falling asleep, and it snowballs, then it's directly contributing to the issues you're having falling asleep.
And that seems to be a tricky one these days, of just, as you mentioned, young people being so used to having their phone that even not having the phone, which is obviously bad for their sleep, but not having the phone can create a state of anxiety. And so it's almost, it takes a real period of adjustment, doesn't it, to sort of coach them out of the behavior, doesn't it?
Yes. And that is the single most difficult thing when it comes to speaking with younger players, is putting their phones in another room. And I'll tell people that it's better to be, it's easier to be safe than to be strong, which basically, if you have it in another room, you're less likely to check it, rather than having it next to your bed and saying, well, I'm going to be strong and I'm not going to look at it at all, because that is not going to work.
It's tough, isn't it? Yeah. It's the willpower game is a tough one.
Right.
Terrific. Well, listen, I mean, you're not only a sleep scientist, as we were talking before, you're a mother, parent. We talked about, the lack of sleep that can accrue over months, years even. And a discussion that I found fascinating was Dr. Amy Bender, who's a sleep scientist out in the west coast of Canada.
I know her well.
There, I imagine you do. And she'd commented, I suppose, in Matthew Walker's book, his terrific book, he makes a comment around how you can't catch up on sleep, or, you can't, once sleep is lost, we can't regain it. And she had sort of touched on sort of an evolutionary side of, well, having children, and throughout evolution, surely there was periods of reduced sleep. So maybe this comes back to the question around banking sleep, but I'm not sure, what side of the fence you sit on that one, or if you could provide any insights for listeners there.
Well, so again, this is a nuanced subject, but let's make it really simple. So yes, you can't really consume more sleep than your sleep need. Mm-hmm. So you can't really bank sleep like you would put, that concept of banking in which you put extra money away.
In the account, right? Yeah.
Right. You can't do that. But, so there is research that shows that what they did is that they took subjects and they extended their time in bed for a week, and that made them more resilient to the subsequent sleep deprivation that they put them through. Mm-hmm. And so, in addition, in that research, they showed that there was faster recovery of, several neurobehavioral variables that they were measuring in those subjects who had obtained excessive sleep prior to sleep restriction. So although we just said it's impossible to consume more than your sleep need, and so banking is not in the true sense, but since most people have some amount of sleep deprivation, it's basically a concept of catching up prior to, making sure you get enough sleep prior to when you'll be sleep deprived. I'll give you an example. Hold on.
Terrific.
So for example, if I knew I was going to be on call starting Monday, and I knew that, Monday and Tuesday I would get less sleep, the worst thing I could do to myself would be to get less sleep over the weekend. Instead, I'd be better off, playing catch up, sleeping in, banking sleep. So, getting enough sleep, because that would make it it would make it easier for me to tolerate that sleep deprivation, which I knew was going to come. And so I think that if you think about sleep banking in those terms, then it works. And this is what, this is like a full cycle. This is what we were talking about, how that is the only way that Major League Baseball players can approach their season. They have to look at it as opportunities when you can get enough sleep to make sure, that's where the discipline comes in. That's where the education matters. They get enough sleep when they can, because they know they're going to get less sleep. And then they play catch up. Then they sleep in, they sleep longer, and you could call it playing catch up, you could call it banking it for the next opportunity, the next sleep deprivation that's going to come up.
Yeah, fantastic point. I mean, that's definitely, when you have those periods that you're going to be missing total sleep time or whatnot, being able to extend the sleep and being in a position where you can offset that or not succumb to those consequences is such a great tip for athletes, practitioners,
and just
moms, dads, anybody traveling.